The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. Not a sunny day here in Southern California, but it's sunny for this reason. We have a former ESPN anchor, now at the MLB Network, one of my favorites. He's on the Subway Fresh Take Hotline right now in a hotel room. He doesn't have a new house yet. He's in New Jersey. Brian Kenny, what's happening?
How are you, Bill? Good to talk to you again.
Yeah, I would have been sad if we never talked, emailed, or did anything again, and you just disappeared from my life. That wouldn't have been
yeah,
ideal
me too.
for me.
It can't happen that way.
So you left ESPN after how many years?
14 years at ESPN.
14 years, long time. And how many kids did you sire and raise while you lived in
my wife, Nikki, and I had 5 kids when we arrived at the ESPN.
Oh, there you go.
Age 17, 4.
Wow. And all of them grew up as you worked on the
Yes,
World Wide
absolutely.
All right. So I thought you were a great baseball guy, and I'm happy that you are heading to the MLB Network. What are you going to be doing there?
I'm going to be doing all their different shows. I'm doing Quick Pitch all this week. Next week I start doing some MLB Tonights. We're planning some off-season shows, so wherever they want me, that's where I'll go.
All right. We covered it. Let's talk about Floyd Mayweather.
Right.
Would you put him in the Sonny Liston, Mike Tyson, right around the ear-biting range level of boxing villain at this point?
Yeah, I think he's created that persona, and I think he's, like Tyson, also enormously popular. People want to love him, people respect him, and yet there is, he's made himself into this heel, and that's also very good for business. I think once he recognized that was good for business, he played up to it.
So you think this is 65% intentional?
Yeah, it might be a little more than that. Might be more than that. I think when he started doing the 24/7, look, he generally, I think, coming up. Remember, he was Fighter of the Year in 1998. I mean,
right.
He goes way back. I mean, he was Fighter of the Year way back when, and I think he found himself like 7 years into his career where the people, the aficionados in the sport thought he was marvelous, but in the mainstream, he was lagging way behind, Roy Jones Jr., Evander Holyfield, every heavyweight basically that was on top, and he felt that was also affecting his earning power, and he felt slighted. So I think he had that feeling of, not getting his due, and once he started airing that publicly, it became part of his persona, and then once 24/7 hit for the De La Hoya Mayweather show and that fight, I think it started to really resonate, and he saw that being the villain and playing the role of Money Mayweather was good for business.
Yeah, I wonder if there was any residual effects from him watching what happened with Roy Jones, because I think Roy Jones was the Mayweather of last decade, where he was just so revered by everyone who actually followed boxing, but unfortunately was so good that he just never really had that signature fight or that signature rival. Well, I mean, wouldn't you say Mayweather was kind of this decade's or last decade's version of that?
Yeah, and also what was worse for him was he wasn't even as exciting. He knows he's not like an electrifying fighter. He's not going to put himself in harm's way, whereas Roy Jones with his hand speed and his foot speed, I mean, Roy blowing somebody out was exciting. Floyd blowing somebody out is methodical and boring.
Yep. And I mean, I would say the biggest tribute to Floyd at this point is that he's probably been tagged less than any great boxer I can remember. I mean, can you remember him getting really popped like 5 times in his entire career?
No, when he gets hit, and that's kind of like Roy Jones too. When Floyd got hit and rocked by Shane Mosley, it was stunning. It was, it was along the lines, although not as much, of course, of like Roy Jones getting drilled by Tarver. That was more final and more complete, where he got knocked out and got thrown on his back. But Roy, I mean, I can remember Roy Jones losing the first round to Derek Harmon because, the first round of that fight, because he lost so few rounds. He just never lost rounds. So when Floyd loses a round, or when he loses 3 of the first 4 rounds to Zab Judah, it's like, wow, what are we watching? When he loses several of the first few rounds to Oscar De La Hoya, it's kind of stunning, and yet he always comes back to win. But yeah, I'd put him up in that category because he loses so few rounds. He doesn't get hurt. I mean, it's a master at work. I've only seen Willie Pep in film, and I've never gotten a full, look at exactly what Pep is doing in the ring. I'm told by all the old timers that this was the master of defense. I would say Mayweather has to be considered in that discussion with Willie Pep.
Yeah. It's too bad. You're a giant saber guy. I respect the saber movement. I'm not as much into it. But
you're a fully analytic saber guy. You're talking in everything you write now. I realize, wow, you've got fielding independent pitching, you've got WAR, you've got ERA plus. It's like you're like baseball prospectus at this point.
Well, the problem is, I totally respect it, and I think it's really useful, but I think there's a growing chasm now between the people that understand these stats and like them and evaluate what they're watching with them, and people who just look at them and go, that's too complicated. Not only do I not want to read it, I don't like reading it, and it makes me mad when people use these stats. And it's unfortunate because I can't totally blame the people who don't have time to learn these stats and are threatened by them and don't understand why they can't just watch every Red Sox game like my dad and say, I watch every Red Sox game. I don't feel confident when Adrian Gonzalez is up at the plate in a big moment. I don't care what the stats say. That's the chasm, and I don't really know how we resolve that. I mean, we've come a long way in the last 10 years, but I think that chasm's gotten worse. Do you feel it?
No, I feel it's really gotten closer and closer.
Oh,
where
good.
Now anybody who's looking and can see, boy, I get the feeling that Gonzalez doesn't come through in the clutch. Well, look it up. And it's really just the search for truth. And know that, I watch a number of games and it looks like Gonzalez isn't coming through. It's funny, I feel the opposite, Bill. I don't watch every game, certainly of the Red Sox, but I've watched a lot of them, and every time Gonzalez gets up, I feel like, well, look, if you put anything over the plate, he's going to crush it. Something good is going to happen for him. Yeah. And I'd be surprised if I found out otherwise in the stats. But if I looked him up and I found out otherwise, I'd go with it. I think it's always a search for truth. It's not a search for math. My eyes glaze over when I start looking at all these graphs and all these different things. I don't want math. I just would like the concrete answers to my questions. Right.
And I think my dad's counter-argument to that would be, I'm 63 years old. I don't feel like going online and looking up Adrian Gonzalez's close and late stats. I just want to watch the games and have my opinion.
Yeah, when you go to watch the game, you want to just enjoy the game, of course. And it's a physical sport. But if you are wondering, for example, over the last, say 5-6 years ago, you might be saying, wow, Jeter doesn't seem to get to that middle. You would like an answer to that. Boy, is that true, or is it just that, there's always balls up the middle that even Derek Jeter with his speed can't get to? You're looking for answers like that, and now there's a way of at least trying to find the truth on those things.
Right. Well, let's hold this thought because I want to talk about this in more detail. Back to boxing for a second, because I was making the point that if this saber movement had translated to boxing, there's a couple really interesting ways it could have gone, and maybe it's gone there and I don't know about it. But like, for instance, here's a stat that would be pretty easy to keep. Like you mentioned how many rounds Mayweather has won over the course of his career.
Right.
That seems like something we could probably keep track of, right? And
depending on the judges, of course. But yeah, rounds won percentage. And you would figure that Roy Jones, Floyd Mayweather would be right there at the top.
Right. But, I mean, I guess you would do it like 2 of the 3 judges had to score the round in the guy's favor. It would be a beast to look up, and it's probably impossible.
And also very difficult to look up, like, okay, now how would Floyd Mayweather compare to Ray Robinson? Because you figure Ray Robinson as a welterweight, he didn't lose any fights. So would he, many rounds? We don't know. And it was And there's actually very little film exists of Ray Robinson as a welterweight. We always see an older Sugar Ray Robinson. So, but I'd of course love to see that comparison. Maybe you could do it with Sugar Ray Leonard. But then it's, who are you fighting? There's a lot of different subjective things and elements into it that you'd have to introduce.
I mean, at least how long has HBO been doing the CompuBox boxing and all that stuff? That's been at least 15 years, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think that goes back 15, 20 years. So we'd be able to compare that era.
Yeah, at least we have those stats, and for any fighter, I would say after like 81, 82, it would seem like we would have the judges round by round result. So it doesn't seem, I guess you could only do it for the bigger guys, but it doesn't seem. And the other thing that I think I'd love to know, like how many times a guy has gotten tagged over the course of his career, and is there a tipping point for the number of the times? Again, it would be tough to figure out what constitutes as getting tagged. But you think of like Roy Jones, a guy who never got hit, and now you could knock him out tomorrow if you challenged him to a fight in New Jersey. Something clearly happens to some of these guys after they get hit enough times. Yeah,
that's true. And I think you'd have to mark a guy like you would in baseball, like the prime. Roy Jones's prime. And that's pre-Tarver, where he wasn't getting roughed up by Glenn Johnson. When he's beating James Toney and Bernard Hopkins, I mean, that's a high level of competition. How many rounds is he actually losing? Very few. And I think that's something, too, that Floyd Mayweather's 34, and this is still his prime. I mean, he just handled Victor Ortiz, no matter how it ended, and it ended bizarrely, but he still handled a guy who had beaten Andre Berto to become the top welterweight other than Pacquiao and Mayweather.
Our friend Max Kellerman thinks that Floyd gets a bad rap for this reason. He's actually the purest athlete, or at least one of the purest athletes in sports. Not only does he not cheat or do anything to, whatever, he wants everybody that he fights not to cheat. And he wants to be 100% certain that everybody on both sides, or that both people are clean on both sides. And he will take any test that anybody wants to give him, and he knows he's going to pass it. And all he's asking is, I want the guy I'm fighting to be clean and take whatever tests we need to take to prove this. Pacquiao doesn't want to take a couple of those tests, and yet the consensus is that Mayweather is ducking Pacquiao. Is that fair?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that, but I would say, I mean, for years, as we blame the Baseball Players Association for the steroid mess, we would have all loved for a top player, let's say it's Ken Griffey, Derek Jeter, we would have loved some player to come out and say, hey, let's all do the latest Olympic-style drug testing so we're all on the same playing field and let's be clean. We would have loved that. And that's what Floyd Mayweather is doing now, so you're right, he should be applauded for that. No question. That said, Pacquiao did not want to have the blood testing up to like a certain amount of days just before the fight. His next move should be, yes, full WADA Olympic-style drug testing, random testing and training. He should do that. If he doesn't, if he balks now, then, he should be looked at with greater scrutiny.
And the scrutiny's been pretty it's been pretty there so far. The amount of weight classes that he jumped and the amount of muscle that he's been able to keep on his body, it's definitely suspicious. There's no question. And it's not like boxing is the greatest with testing this stuff. I think there was a lot of suspicion about Ortiz after the Berto fight because he was so unbelievable in that fight, and he just looked so big, and he looked like a beast, and he looked stronger, than Berto did, and it had a little bit of that prior Arguello kind of feel to that. Do you feel like this stuff goes on in boxing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go on in any sport, and I think it can definitely go on in boxing. And it's more dangerous in boxing, where a guy becomes superhuman. If anything, you need more blood testing, and you need unified rules, too. You can't just go state for state. It's certainly, and now we're also seeing where it appears to be more sophisticated, where guys don't just bulk up and get huge, because you can't. You need to be in your weight class. But there's a different look to a guy that we're seeing now, and you wonder, all right, is this state-of-the-art training regimen? Is this new age nutrition because there have been great advances, or is there just a new level of hormone out there that is creating these new physiques?
Yeah. And how long do you think this has been going on? You've been following boxing your whole life. Because I think we have this naive feeling like that steroid use started with McGuire and Sosa.
Right. No, it started. Look, you can go back to 1976. The East German women's Olympic team were bulked up out of their mind. 1976. Ben Johnson was 1988. So, these things have been available. They haven't been as sophisticated, but you'd be crazy to think that this doesn't go back to the 70s. That doesn't mean everybody was cheating. It was more difficult, but certainly by the 80s, it's front and center and available.
Well, in football, it definitely was in the 70s. And, you look at, I hate to bring movies into this, but you look at what Sly Stallone did in the 80s. And I think he's even admitted some of it. And Schwarzenegger was doing it in the 70s to win his bodybuilding competitions. I think it's naive to think that this never trickled into baseball and boxing in the late 70s and, in the 80s. And I think, we all have our head in the sands with basketball. The feeling is like, basketball, these guys would never do that. At some point, we're going to feel pretty stupid about that, I think.
I agree. You look at the physiques now, and you think, wow, is this just a new genetic makeup? Is nutrition that much better? And yes, and yet on top of that, there's probably some new age stuff out there that is not being detected and has no chance of being detected if you're not doing blood testing. If you're doing blood testing, then at least there's a chance of catching up to these guys. One thing now, it's funny, as I'm watching more and more baseball, and I'm watching, obviously tons of baseball now doing MLB Network, I'm amazed at the size of these guys. They look like normal human beings. It almost looks like, and I'm the most cynical person out there, Bill, but it's almost like looking at the 1986 World Series again where, geez, these guys are like normal-sized guys. It's kind of, I hope it's refreshing in that way, and that these are normal human beings now playing top sports.
And as you said, the biggest danger with boxing is that you can, unlike the other sports, you can really hurt somebody. I guess you could in football to some degree, but this is a little different. I think the punishment that Berto took in that Ortiz fight, if Ortiz had cheated to get the results that he got in that fight, that's something that might stick with him. Now you're looking at what was the Pernell Whitaker Cesar Chavez fight when Pernell Whitaker was just, or I'm sorry, Mildred Taylor. Mildred Taylor was just never the same after that. I'm not saying Chavez cheated in that fight, but you can have enough punishment in a fight that you're not going to come back.
Right. That's also like at the core of the hand wraps controversy with Antonio Margarito or Felix Trinidad, where there were fights that these guys had where their opponents were never quite the same, because as we see, there's a cumulative effect from concussion. And if a guy continues to be concussed or has a very bad night where he suffers that bad of concussion, now he is much more likely to get future concussions, and that's being applied directly in boxing.
Yeah, and you think like the concussion research we're doing, and how it is in football. Like Mike Vick now might not play this week because he had a concussion, and in boxing the whole point is to concuss the other guy. That's what you're trying to do. That's why you're out there.
That's exactly it, right? So it's the object of the sport, to knock him out, to remove him from his senses for a short period of time. So you've got to be much more careful. Of course, in boxing, at the very least, there's not that much sanity out there, but at least when a guy is knocked out, he is automatically suspended. There's an automatic suspension, and that goes back decades, where the guy's not supposed to fight again for a month or 2 months.
Right. Do you feel like we're coming to the end of the line to some degree here with boxing? Because Mayweather-Pacquiao is really the only giant fight out there. There's some smaller ones that I think boxing fans would get excited about, but the growth of MMA over the last 10 years and just the whole concussion thing in general, the fact that we don't really have that many signature American guys anymore. Like, are we headed to a place where boxing is even a mainstream sport in 20 years?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's going to stay where it is. It's a niche sport. I don't see it because there's no unified governing body that we're all looking to, or nobody looking for the long-term benefit of the sport. So it stays a niche sport. But we also thought that when Tyson goes away, no one will be following it. When De La Hoya retires, no one will be following it. I think someone else pops up. I think there's always going to be interest in the sport, but it is where it is for a reason. There's no one league looking out for its long-term benefit putting it out on free TV, putting it out on, basic cable to generate that audience again, the way UFC can just do whatever they want to do long-term planning and strategy.
Right. Obviously we need a boxing czar. And this is Obama, I wish, out of the many things that he hasn't done, I think this is a big one. The boxing czar would have been gigantic. If there's ever a sport that needed just one guy to come in and be like, we're doing this, enough with every state has a different policy, I'm changing the weight classes, these weight classes are stupid, we're going to have super heavyweights now, I'm going to spread the pounds out. I mean, what would you do if Obama called you and he said, Bronchetti, I want you to be my boxing czar?
Well, you'd have to set it up. You would have I would keep all the weight classes. I would add, you're right, I would add a super heavyweight weight class to accommodate these dreadnoughts and not have guys 210 pounds fighting guys regularly at 253.
It's the dumbest thing ever. There's a 50-pound weight difference with the Klitschko's, and nobody cares. They've killed heavyweight boxing.
And it's almost like, it would create more interest, too, because then you'd have a heavyweight champion, just like you do in the amateurs, and occasionally you'd say, hey, that guy at 215 could beat this guy at 250. Like in, amateur wrestling. A lot of times the guys who are in the unlimited weight class, they're huge, but they're really nowhere near as skilled as the slightly smaller guys. There's a lot of things to do, but you'd have to do it also and create incentives in the marketplace. You'd have to have all the major TV networks on board, but you'd have to do it with all the weight classes. You'd have to have one champion per weight class, create tournaments to create ones where vacancies are there. It would be a money-making proposition. But again, that would mean you would then have to be dealing with all of these promoters because it's still kind of a barnstorming effort out there. And that's always going to be there. So it's always going to be ripe with corruption. Anytime anyone has swept in and tried to do this sort of thing, eventually having all that power can lead to a lot of corruption.
Yeah, I understand that on paper, but it's just hard for me to accept that somebody with some sort of political clout somewhere can't fix this.
No, I agree. I agree, but no one is really willing to do that. And then I think it could be done because you have all these state commissions. You'd need a national commission. Teddy Atlas has been talking about it for a decade and a half now. A national commission with a national commissioner. And by the way, I'd make Teddy the national commissioner. I don't want that. You don't want that. Give it to Teddy Atlas.
Right. Well, maybe you have maybe it's a whole thing about not just boxing but MMA and any other sort of contact sport that has concussions, and it just really isn't totally legalized in the right kind of way, and you have the whole umbrella, and that's how you figure it out. It does seem like there's a lot of money still here because, Ross Greenberg, they said he left on his own volition. I don't believe that. I think that he was pushed out the door, but I think part of it was because, boxing is a big, big thing for HBO.
It's still a money-making proposition. You look at all the fight cards that are going on worldwide, and that's part of it, too. I know in this country we're looking at, there's no heavyweights out there, but realize that the heavyweight championship of the world is being fought for in front of 50,000 people every time in a soccer stadium in Germany. Either Klitschko defending it. So it is happening. It is big business. It's just the heavyweight business is not big in this country. That doesn't mean it's not big. It's filling stadiums, Bill, in Europe.
Yeah.
Stadiums.
And the pay-per-view numbers have been good for the big fights. And, obviously something's going on because Showtime has boxing on all the time, and so does HBO, and they fight for the rights to stuff. And, you can't say that that's going out the window. I do wonder, though, we haven't had a really bad incident in a while, and this goes the same for MMA. MMA has really lucked out with not having like a tragedy inside the octagon or whatever, and we haven't had a Dooku Kim type situation in boxing either for a while. I think going to 12 rounds helped. But
I think so too, and I think MMA has gotten a break. I think. Although they seem to be it's funny, the referees, it's funny the difference between the referees in boxing and in MMA. The refs in MMA look like guys that, would beat anybody they would fight in there.
Right.
And actually they're very quick to stop fights. If you're really looking at it, and plus it doesn't in a lot of ways that stuff is safer because in boxing, you have to take a guy out while he's standing on his feet, and that takes repeated shots to the head. In MMA, you get in one move on a guy, and it's over. So in a lot of ways, your long-term health, like Randy Couture, is going to be in much better shape than Floyd Mayweather, when they reach their 50s and 60s.
The all-time slowest referee ever to stop for a stoppage was Foreman Lyle, right? Unless you want to go Drago Balboa and Rocky IV. It's down to those two. Those are the two finalists.
Yeah, I love
Just
watching
staring
any
at
of
the
the Rocky
carnage.
fights, and you think, what are they thinking? They cannot do this. But it's still fun. And it's actually more reflective of the era, because you watch the old-time fights. We have them on, still on, on Classic, on ESPN Classic. We run the Ringside series, and blood didn't bother them back then. Nowadays, a guy gets cut, it's like, they're going to have to stop the fight, which is the right way of looking at it. You watch the old stuff, and you think, what are these guys thinking? This is awful, but they let those things go.
We have a big oral history on the Leonard Hagler fight coming this week on Grantland. I think it's going to run on Wednesday. The most polarizing fight, I think, for boxing fans, and the one that I've gotten in the most arguments about. And almost 25 years later, we still don't have a consensus on who won this thing. And I feel like it's one of those things where you have to have a stand one way or the other. You can't do I don't know. Like, you really have to come in with your opinion on who won, who lost. I feel like Leonard won the fight. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a boxing competition. There's a certain way of scoring it. Sugar Ray Leonard outlanded Marvelous Marvin Hagler on that night. He wins. It doesn't mean he, beat him up or won a real fight, but he won the boxing match that night by outpointing him, by outlanding him. It was stunning. It shouldn't have happened. A lot of things had to happen for Hagler to not just be dominant, even against Leonard, who, is an all-time great. But it did happen that night. Hagler gave early rounds away and then just did not outpoint him, and should have kept the pressure on from the very start, gave up the big ring, gave up a lot of things, for Leonard that just made it possible for Sugar Ray to win that fight.
Yeah, we covered this in the oral history. I never knew about. Hagler made more money in the fight. He ended up making, I think, the biggest purse in that entire decade. It was over $20 million, partly because Leonard's camp very smartly said, all right, well, you take a bigger cut of the pay-per-view, but we get the bigger ring, we get the different gloves, we get 12 rounds instead of 15, and those were really, the main three reasons that he won the fight. But I'm with you. I thought, first of all, Hagler switching back and forth, all the stuff that he did was just stupid. He gave away the early rounds, but it was like a slow, Hagler just was not on his game, and you watch that fight again, and I've probably watched it, 12 times, because Leonard was my favorite boxer. Hagler just wasn't on his game. He fought a bad fight. He didn't punish Leonard enough. He let Leonard kind of dictate not just the pace of the fight, but the crowd, which was neutral heading into it, by the ninth round was just 100% for Leonard. And that's got to count in the big scheme of things. And, I know that's a stupid opinion to say, the crowd's got to count with the scoring. But if you're owning the ring and you're owning the night and you're owning the stadium, I don't see how the judges can't get affected by that, and that should
it's
matter.
Close, and rounds are normally, can be very close. It's always subjective. Leonard ran in that fight. I mean, he just moved and moved and moved, and it was a big ring. And so, Hagler had a lot of miles on the odometer. Again, he had gone to war with one fighter after another in Philadelphia, all through the pre-championship phase of his career. So by the time he reached that night, had that been a smaller ring, he would have found Leonard much easier. He wouldn't have had to been chasing him around, and it would have been a very different fight. And Leonard, right after the fight, he said that he couldn't run and move for another 30 seconds. He was done. He said he told me he barely finished that fight. So that was everything he had, and it took all of those advantages for him to get that win. Another thing on the switching, going from southpaw to orthodox, Hagler, it's funny, was actually great at that. He did that against guys like Willie the Worm Monroe in the 70s, but he did it when it was organic and when it made sense strategically. In this, I think he forced it, I'm going to come out this way against Leonard and confuse him, when actually you should do it in midstream, and that's what made Hagler extra special was that he'd be in the middle of combat and suddenly switch up on you in the middle of a round, and you'd be like, wait a second, he shouldn't be this good fighting this way, and
Right.
he is. But to come out and say, I'm going to do it this way, I'm going to show him, that backfired on him.
Well, for me, that was the toughest fight I ever had to watch because Leonard was my guy. Yeah, my first guy was Ali, just from when I wrote of sports. I was like 4 or 5 or 6 whenever they were showing him. I just obviously fell in love with him. And then Leonard, 76 Montreal Olympics, I was in from the get-go. I probably saw every televised fight that Leonard had, throughout his career. Meanwhile, there's this guy, Marvin Hagler, who's living in Brockton, Massachusetts, not that far away from Boston, and a local guy fought his way up the ranks, and he just never got a break. He got screwed in the Infermo fight. Finally won the title in England, and this became Boston's guy, and I was living in Boston at the time. This was our guy, and now all of a sudden you can just see it in the distance, like, uh-oh, who am I going to root for when this happens? And Leonard, there's never a question. Leonard was my guy. Do you think Leonard, looking back, underrated, possibly?
I think so, yeah. I mean, we see him now as a big star, but even when you look at where he ranks all time, I mean, not underrated by boxing aficionados when you really look it through. I mean, just for him to come up and so early in his career move up and take on the top guys, take on Benitez right away.
15 rounds.
Take on all the top fighters, lose the title to Duran, come back and fight Duran. I mean, and actually even that the fight that he had against Hearns. I mean, people I think forget just how huge that fight was. I mean, it was such an epic event, and Hearns was such a killer. I mean, Hearns was a frightening fighter leading up to that fight, and so Leonard just took on one monster after another. I think Burt Sugar has him like number 9 all time, pound for pound. That's incredibly high praise, and I think that's where he belongs.
He fought Duran like a man the first time. I saw that one closed circuit. And he knew, because the second time he fought him the way he should have fought him, and the famous No Mas fight. But that first fight was almost like, oh, you think I'm a pretty boy and I can't mix it up? Watch this. And it cost him the fight. But, you look at the Hearns fight, to me, is his defining fight. And we'll never know what would have happened if he didn't have the detached retina, how he would have cruised through the 80s. He ended up having a cocaine problem, which he admits now. And I don't know if he has that problem, if he's boxing that whole decade. But the Hearns fight, to me, is his masterpiece. And as you said, you forget how huge that fight was. To me, the two biggest fights of my lifetime that just are never mentioned now, and I don't think people remember properly how huge they were Leonard Hearns and Holmes Cooney. Holmes Cooney was a huge fight.
Oh, yeah.
It's just never mentioned again. Cooney's like a joke now. That was a huge fight.
Yeah, you'd have to go through, if you went through Cooney's ascension, through the ranks, you would see he was a legitimate top contender for the heavyweight title. He was just fighting the wrong guy at the wrong time. We know now Holmes is an all-time great heavyweight. Holmes is an all-time great and probably a tough matchup for anybody. Obviously you don't have him ranked as high as Ali and Joe Louis, but right after those guys, Holmes could handle himself with anybody. And, I tell you what, Larry Holmes in his prime against Ali, I'm still wondering what might happen. I wouldn't favor him, but Holmes was that great, and it was just Cooney, fighting the wrong guy with the wrong style because Holmes was that great. But Jerry Cooney was destroying legitimate guys in a frightening fashion all the way through. And you're right, that was a huge event. It became ugly because it was black versus white, but Jerry Cooney belonged there. Now, it wasn't a smart move to put him there at that moment. They should have waited, but there was so much money waiting for him at that point. Maybe you just can't pass that up.
And the problem was he destroyed Ken Norton, which we had just gotten HBO like 6 months before, and I watched that one live, and there was no doubt in my mind Jerry Cooney was going to be the next champion. I was like, this guy's unbelievable. This guy's the real Rocky. Like, this lefty, just killer.
Oh, and huge.
And
huge guy.
And also, the Holmes-Cooney fight was a little closer than people remember. People remember that now.
I mean, that went into the late rounds and into deep waters, where he basically was exhausted and came apart. But round for round, that was not an embarrassment for Jerry Cooney.
Not at all.
No, and it's a shame he couldn't mentally recover from that, because you wanted to say to him, and I remember at the time, even in our gym where I was in Catskill, we were all thinking, hey, you know what? You shouldn't be embarrassed losing to the champ.
Right.
You can come back from that. You would have beaten most anybody on that night. That's the one guy you're not going to beat. Let him go away, retire, and then you take over.
And, maybe if 12 rounds instead of 15, that might have been a different fight. I would also argue, I think he fought Holmes as well as anybody except Ken Norton. Until you get to Tyson. I don't really count the Tyson fight. Holmes
No, you can't. That's not Larry Holmes. At that point, that's not Holmes anymore. No.
Cooney and Norton were Holmes' two toughest fights, right?
Yeah, Shavers.
Oh, I forgot about Shavers. Yeah. Shavers, the great lost boxer.
Right.
That would be a good thing. Shavers would be a good documentary. He's the guy that it seems like everybody else was terrified of that whole era. Even Ali said that was the hardest he's ever been hit.
Yeah, no, he might be the hardest hitter of all time, Ernie Shavers.
Yeah. So anyway, so Leonard Hagler, you have Leonard winning that fight.
Yeah, I rescored it a couple of times. I believe I had it like 7-5 or 8-4. I don't remember precisely now, but it was not close enough. Like there was no way I could make it a draw. Because I think Hagler gave away too many rounds. And I loved look, I like both guys now. I mean, I love both guys now. And I've seen Ray Leonard when we've done the Contender together. I see him a lot when he came in when I was, still at ESPN, which is only a few weeks ago. I love Ray Leonard, but I was definitely a Hagler guy. Loved Hagler on the way up. So I would love to give him rounds, but I just can't do it. And
Hagler Hearns, where does that rank in your top 5 favorite fights?
1.
1, okay.
It's the best. Well, is it the best ever? Yeah, actually, I'd watch that before I would watch Diego Corrales and Jose Luis Castillo, which I saw live, even though I think that's the greatest fight that I've actually seen. I think what fight would I like to watch? Because guys, all-time greats getting after each other, including, Hagler. Hagler Hearns is number 1.
And the thing that pushes that over the top is that there was hype for it, and there's bad blood, and rarely does a fight like that happen when you've had all the lead up to it. Like Corrales Castillo, the real boxing fans were excited about it, but that's not a fight it wasn't a water cooler lead up to that fight. This was different. This was like Tommy Hearns. He'd only lost to Leonard at that point. And we didn't, he really could have had that Leonard fight. If he had just skipped around for 4 rounds, he wins the fight. And instead he mixed it up and he got caught.
Right. And also, in the ring, you can say, well, Hearns is the guy moving up in weight, but he's much bigger than Hagler. Hagler's a normal-sized guy,
right.
5'9", 160, etched, of course. But Hearns is 6'1" with that wingspan. I mean, he's the bigger guy in the ring, and he's throwing a thunderous right hand.
I don't think Hearns gets enough credit on the genetic freak athlete scale. Like you always mention Bo Jackson and people like that. When am I going to see Tommy Hearns again?
No, it's funny. He's the standard for me. Like when you're talking about just someone who, genetically freakish and an incredible advantage over every other human. To me, the first guy that comes to mind is Tommy Hearns. Like when Paul Williams was even coming up and was showing great promise recently. What's the one thing you say? You don't even say Mark Breland, who had great advantage too with his size, but you say Hearns because Hearns could box and harm you at 6'1", 147 pounds. It's unfair. You shouldn't be at 147 at 6'1", 6'2".
Yeah, and unfortunately for him, he came along probably at the worst possible arc he could have had. If it had been like 5 years later, he would have been great. He would have been perfect, right?
He would have ruled, but he would have ruled from 147 to 175.
Right.
But then look at it this way, that he fought all those top guys, and it creates more of a legend, made him more money.
I guess. It made him unintelligible.
A lot of that happens anyway, unfortunately.
Yeah, because I was watching Barkley on NBA TV was rerunning some playoff gems that they'd never shown, and they had young Barkley from 1990, who was just a force of nature like Hearns was. You watch it and you go, all right, I'm never going to see a 6'4" guy dominate the boards, be able to go coast to coast, be able to bang bodies like this. It's just not going to happen again. I will never see this. And I feel like Hearns was that way too. Let's switch to baseball for a second. The pitchers for the Cy Young thing, what's your take?
National League you're talking about, because American League's pretty easy.
I'm not the pitchers for the MVP.
Oh, pitchers for MVP. I think.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely possible. I think you have to weigh that. I think it has to be an overwhelming pitcher year. I know I looked up win shares to see like the most dominant years that I've seen or that I've analyzed, and that's the Pedro, I believe is at 99 and 2000, Maddox 94 and 95 when he had like the 1.56 ERA, Ron Guidry when he was 25 and 3 in 1978, and basically there always seemed to be one other guy in win shares that was higher than those pitchers. So you really have to be super dominant, but I'm not ruling it out. I've had arguments with people on this recently where they say, no, you've got to be playing every day. But let's just say even if you're, Troy Tulowitzki in his best year and you're a Gold Glove shortstop who's leading the league in slugging, let's say, you can only influence a game even at that position so much day to day. As a pitcher, you can dominate that day. And if you're, 75% of the game on one day, and even though you can only pitch every fifth day, does that constitute more value? I say it's very possible, and it's very possible. I read what you wrote on Verlander, and until they got Pfister, he was the only guy that gave them an advantage on the mound, and it's an incredible advantage.
Right, and I just look at what would have happened had he been on the Red Sox this month. Because Lester had two chances to stop what was going on and didn't. If Verlander's on the team, you look at the schedule and you're like, oh crap, we got to throw Wakefield out there, we got to throw Lackey. But at least we have Verlander coming on Sunday. We know we're going to win that game, and I don't think there's a stat that can capture that mindset. If you don't have a guy like that, you have the possibility to go into a free fall like the Red Sox just did. And, then you look at the other stuff, like, let's say Brian Kenny can go retroactively in April and he can become the GM of his own American League team, and he can have anybody in the league for that season, and he wants to give himself the best chance to win. You take Verlander's 2011 season over anybody else.
I tell you what, it will be close with that and Jose Bautista, though, because if I can get a guy slugging, I don't know where he is now, but he's slugging 6, playing the outfield every day, I'm not. I think it's very close.
I mean, Bautista, like Mickey Cabrera's kind of snuck at least. It's not close, but it's not as much of a rout as it was 5 weeks ago, I don't think. And Cabrera's come on, and he's on a much better team.
The team thing doesn't matter to me. Again, I'm not.
But that drives me crazy. How can that not matter? Jose Bautista gets to come up. There's no pressure on any at bat that he's had this season.
So you think that it's easier to bat when your team stinks?
I think it is much easier to be Jose Bautista this year than it was to be Justin Verlander, or even to be Miggy Cabrera, or even to be Curtis Granderson. If you're going to really say who's the most valuable guy, then Rivera has to be involved in the discussion, because what happens to the Yankees if he just misses the whole year? That's the part where it gets the whole valuable thing gets a little dicey.
Look, that's true with pitchers and getting into closers and that sort of thing. I think fully effective as a closer, you definitely need to be on a superior team. But I don't think Jose Bautista, if you took him from the Blue Jays and put him on the Red Sox, would be having a much lower year of productivity because, people are watching me and we're very good. And by the way, he's 60 points higher in slugging than Cabrera. That's quite a bit.
All right, but what's the on base? Now I'm going to look at this.
Okay, let's look at it. On base is 447. Cabrera is 440. All right, so that's about even. Cabrera has a higher batting average, which is better than walking a lot. But slugging, that's still 60 points. That's a lot.
All right. That's it, though. That's his only real major advantage other than
but that's the real
stuff.
major advantage you want, power. There's nothing more important than that as a hitter.
But Cabrera is playing his games in Detroit, and Bautista is playing his games in Toronto. Which park would you rather be in?
You have to then look at the splits for the road splits. I know last time I looked, and I'll look again now, Bautista did not have a tremendous advantage by playing at home. So if you're absolutely right. You have to look at home road immediately. Last time I looked, Bautista was not picking up a major advantage playing in that park.
Here's my point. I'm fine if Bautista was having like a Bonds 2001 year or whatever, and you're just like, this is ridiculous. I don't care if this guy's on an 81 team. This guy's offensive season so far destroys anything else that happened on any of the good guys in the playoff teams that we'd be idiots if we didn't give him the MVP. I can accept that. Like, I think Steve Carlton in 1972 is a great example.
Yeah.
That's like, his season was so ridiculous that year that it's kind of hard to accept that anybody else could have been the most valuable guy on their team. I don't feel that way with this Bautista season. I just don't. But you might. It sounds like you do.
Yeah, I think he's been the most productive player in the league, and he's the one. I think the thought experiment you're doing is the correct one. Is that at the beginning of the year, you know the numbers that everybody's going to have. Who would you pick to give you the best chance to win? I think it's still Bautista, but certainly an argument can be made that it would be Verlander. I'd be tempted to take that.
And if you're just looking at it from a pure numbers standpoint, which it sounds like is what you're doing with Bautista, Jacoby Ellsbury. I mean, now you are drinking the Tim Raines Hall of Fame Kool-Aid along with Jonah Carey and a few others.
Oh yeah, no question.
This is like one of the all-time great Tim Raines seasons that Ellsbury's having here. Now we're talking about he has a chance to end up hitting 320, 375 on base around there, close to 550 slugging, close to about 920 OPS, 30 homers, over 100 RBI, which I don't care. I still feel like they have to matter a tiny bit. Possibly 50 doubles, and then 40 steals. This is, name me 8 better all-around hitting every category seasons in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think the first thing you have to look at then is road splits, how much is benefiting from Fenway. Well, look, you have to do it. I'm sorry, you have to do it. And then past that, though, is that a remarkable season? Yeah, there's no question. I mean, that's it's funny. I'm the one thing, and there's a lot of things that I buy into, obviously, with the sabermetrics and other things that I think are kind of minimized, and is the base running factor and the terror on the base pass. So I look at net steals, and I would add, and he has 23 net steals. You have to add that to his slugging percentage right away. I mean, those bases count. I mean, he's taking outs away. Though he's caught stealing 14 times, but that's still 23 extra bases that he's not getting credit for in his slash numbers that he should be getting credit for. It's not quite Raines, because Raines was stealing 80 bases and getting caught 9 times. I mean,
right.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's a big difference from 37. I mean, that said, Ellsbury's having a great year. I mean, it's a fabulous year. But I mean, consider that now where Raines wasn't hitting for that much power, but he was playing in different parks, and his on base was 400, whereas Ellsbury's is 376. If you're impressed by Ellsbury, I mean, what do you say about Tim Raines? Raines is that much greater.
Hold the Raines thought for a second. Ellsbury's home away, pretty similar, except there's a 76-point difference in slugging. So it's 503 slugging. Yeah.
But that's not pretty similar. That's dissimilar.
Well, I'm saying his on base is the same. Homers, 15 at home, 13 on the road. Steals, 19 at home, 18 on the road. That's what I mean. The slugging is the big difference.
That's a big difference.
Well, that's it though. That's only one.
That's the primary difference. I mean,
okay.
That just means that we shouldn't give him as much credit for the power, but his on base and his speed, certainly make him all-star caliber.
I think he gets credit for he played 150 out of 154 games so far. That's something that if you're going to miss 6 games in an entire season, you should get bonus points.
No question. When I look at my main 3 numbers that I look at when I'm doing a Hall of Fame analysis, I look at on-base, slugging, and I also want to see total bases. I think total bases matter because guys who are in the lineup all the time means you don't have to replace them. I think that's the 3rd most important number to look at.
Do you care about this? Jacoby Ellsbury in wins. 1.013 OPS, 20 homers, 28 steals. Jacoby Ellsbury in losses. 779 OPS, 9 steals, 8 homers. I mean, it's dramatically, ridiculously different, his impact in wins versus losses. Does that matter at all to you?
Well, no, because it's cause and effect.
Okay.
When he plays great, they win. When he doesn't, they lose. I mean, he seems to have a big impact on that. But otherwise, I would say, well, then if he was having a better season, they wouldn't be losing so much. It's unfair, but that goes alongside. Well, when he plays well, they win. Well, what happens when they lose? Well, he's not playing so well. Okay.
Here's Reigns in '87. That was the year he had 330, 429 on base, 526 slugging, and then he had 50 steals, 5 caught, 18 homers. That was the signature Reigns season.
That was '87 in the home run binge year, right?
Yeah, that was something weird happened in '87 with the balls or something funky. I'll also throw this with Ellsbury. His inside the park homer last night, after Lackey had given up 8 runs and it was 11-9, and Aceves couldn't pitch in the nightcap, and it really looked like we were headed for a loss there. And then Ellsbury hit the inside the Parker, and it just ignited everything. I think that the next 6 guys scored after that. Stave off the Orioles. I'm not feeling great about the Red Sox right now, but at least I feel like that was the most memorable hit and play of the season. That's got to factor into whatever. So he's probably the number 3 guy at this point. But this Red Sox collapse, are you buying it? Did they hold him off? What do you think?
No, I think the odds are still in their favor. That was a big win last night. If they
really
lose that last night and it's a 1-game lead, wow.
Oof.
I mean, it's all the difference in the world. I didn't think they'd ever be in this position. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, Bill, I looked at, I was doing my radio show, and I looked at it from, third order wins. Because I thought the Yankees, when you look at run differential, they're the best team in the league. When you actually look at third order wins, which are all how you score runs, Boston seemed to be the best team. Actually, it didn't seem to be. Boston was the best team in the league. It's only a few weeks ago. But basically they're not the same pitching staff that they were. So they're kind of, gassed here at the finish. But I'd rather be 2 games up than 2 games back anytime.
I'm very concerned, and you didn't make me feel any better at all. I'm just telling you that.
No, I wouldn't. I mean, you watched them over the weekend. I would be very concerned with the way they're pitching.
It's not good.
Yeah, and even Lackey. Lackey is very puzzling. I really liked the Lackey signing. I have to tell you, I thought he was vastly underrated with the Angels, and I would never have foreseen him, floating around with a 5 or 6 ERA. I never thought that would happen.
You'd ever thought that he'd have a chance to have the single worst ERA of any starter who's thrown over 150 innings? Did you know about that stat?
Oh, yeah, I heard it last night. No, they're the worst starter out of certain innings. But then again, you have to be pretty good to even get those innings. I would put that in. But no, I never saw that coming with Lackey. I thought it was a good signing. And, I don't know what's happened to him, but he is not the same guy that was pitching with the Angels. I
think your team also has to be pretty desperate. Like, you look at, Lackey, Wakefield, who's just been washed up for 2 years now, and this Scott Weiland, however you say his name, who deer in the headlights, as my dad said. Hard to believe the Red Sox didn't have that double-A pitcher that you could just throw out and hope to get, the spot start where the team hasn't scouted him properly. I think they should leave Lackey off the playoff roster. Just send him home.
So. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you can't have that out there. I know what you mean. It always seems like St. Louis, for example, comes up with some guy making his major league debut and he's perfectly adequate. Like always, he might not be great. He's not great like David Price great or K-Rod great coming up out of nowhere, but just a guy who's good, who gives you quality innings. It always seems St. Louis has those guys in abundance, and you would figure Boston would, but they don't.
The Red Sox in the middle of the decade had a habit of getting stymied by those guys. You'd be like, who started today? Oh, some dude from Chicago. Oh, we'll kill that guy. And then he'd throw a 5-hitter for 6 innings. I'm worried because, unfortunately, they're not going to do anything in the playoffs unless Bedard and or Buchholz can start. And if they can't, then you write them off. I mean, it would almost be better off for this team to not even make the playoffs than to make it and get swept. I mean, emotionally.
Really?
I don't even know. Well, it's just you just don't have a chance.
Oh, you have a chance.
I shouldn't say that.
Yeah,
well,
of course you have a chance.
You're right. All right, thanks for talking me out of that. Thanks for talking me out of that.
It didn't take long.
I don't want to get swept. I just remember in 05 when that team stunk and it was all right, we're going to make the playoffs and the White Sox are going to beat us up, and that's exactly what happened. I don't want to get embarrassed in the playoffs, and I don't want to have to watch Scott Weiland pitch a playoff game or whatever junk guy they're going to throw out. The biggest mistake they've made, and finally people are writing about it. My dad and I have been talking about it for 2 weeks. I don't understand why Aceves isn't starting. Yesterday, he threw 3 unbelievable innings to keep them in the game, which they lost, but they used him for 53 pitches. Just start the freaking guy. What are you waiting for? It's the third best starter of the team.
Right. It depends now. Yeah, what is he used to starting? I don't know. Is he used to starting?
The guy's superhuman. I'd pitch him in any situation ever. I'd throw him in. He comes through all the time. He's been our most clutch guy. He's an MVP
I know
candidate.
When you see numbers like that, unless the guy has never pitched like that before, I always think that it should be brought up. I remember the Twins were very reticent to have Johan Santana actually start. You know, the Phillies had Ryan Madsen as a guy. I remember calling the game for ESPN years ago, and Madsen had terrific numbers, great peripherals, and it was like, I know he's struggling in his first few outings, but you must let him pitch. Eventually he ended up being in the bullpen. But a lot of times teams are very slow to throw a guy out there, and I don't know why either. If the guy has had some sort of background where he's, as they say, stretched his arm out, I don't know what that precisely means or not. But if he has done that at the minor league level, then let him throw.
Well, I think for the Red Sox, he's been so valuable this year as this guy who could just come in any inning and save the day. That he's won games for them that way, and he's had a huge impact in the season. I don't think they want to lose that guy, but I would rather have the starter that could throw 85 innings, 6 pitches, or 6 innings, 85 pitches, versus the guy who can come in and hold by 6-5 deficit. Doesn't make sense. Who do you have winning the World Series right now?
Phillies.
Really? So boring for you, Brian.
I mean, it seems pretty obvious. I mean, it's funny. I actually I looked them up last night. I had them look this up because I saw the Phillies have 3 pitchers in the top 7 in ERA and ridiculous. 3 in the top 4 in WHIP. And I thought, man, how is that? Like, has that happened anytime recently? And it happened with the Red Sox only a couple of years ago. Within the last 10 years. Pedro, Derek Lowe, and guess who else?
Was this 02?
Could have been. I forget the year, but it was right around there.
Pedro, Derek Lowe, and what was the category?
They were top 3 in WHIP, 1, 2, and 3. Right now the Phillies are like 1, 2, and 4.
Who's the third?
Tim Wakefield.
Oh, that was the good Tim Wakefield season. Yeah. Every couple of years he'd have a good one.
Yeah, who knew? I mean, imagine he's top 3 in WHIP. Oh, my God. I mean, I had no idea. So I figured, we'd be going back to at least the Braves and then maybe like the early 50s Yankees and the 54 Indians or the 1970s Orioles. But it was actually, the Red Sox only a couple of years ago with Tim Wakefield.
That is insane. I'm looking at it now. I think it was 2002, I'm going to say. There it is. Yeah, Wakefield. Yeah. You're right.
Look at that. Could you do a podcast without Baseball Reference right in front of you? I wonder.
Thank God for a high-speed internet connection. Thank God for BaseballReference.com.
I know.
Did they build a boxing ring for you at the MLB studios or no?
Yeah, no, not yet.
Okay, you couldn't have put that in the contract as one of your perks?
Yeah, that was not high up on my priority list. Yeah.
Take the brown M&Ms out of my dressing room M&M binge every day, and I want a boxing ring. Those are 2 things I want. Put those in there. Well, we miss you. Fortunately, we get to still see you on TV. Did you start yet?
Yeah, I started last night. I was on. I did Quick Pitch last night, and I was on all this morning. It's like the old school Sports Center that runs all morning. I'm doing that tonight again, and then Wednesday and I think Thursday I do it with Harold Reynolds, so I get to be reunited with Harold on the air. We did like 3 years of baseball tonight together. Yeah. I'm looking forward to that.
And are you going to kind of push the advanced stats a little bit? How are you going to work on that? Because I know at ESPN that was always a big debate about how far to go with that stuff.
Yeah, no, I absolutely am. I've already, I'm putting together a team of guys, but I think it's going to be, you use it organically when it's called for, when you have certain questions. Like I'm looking through different things. I was talking to our researchers, here at MLB Network, and, when I'm looking through the packet, like I see a stat, they say, hey, the Cubs lead the league in errors. And you figure, all right, that makes sense. They're a lousy team. But the next question is, has there ever been a great bad fielding team? So I think that's more where the analytics are, is asking the questions, not coming up with the next, mathematical theory. It's just asking the proper questions, the interesting baseball questions. And that's what I'm going to try to do on a nightly basis.
So you're not going to have like a late-night show called Vorping It Up with Brian Kennedy?
Now that you've given me a good title, maybe we'll do that. Yes, I need you on board.
I got to say, that's not a bad title. I just came up with that right now.
Like
Vorping It Up.
I'm writing that down. Don't copyright that.
Maybe have like a disco light, people dancing in the background. Hey, we're back on Vorping It Up. I'm Brian Kennedy.
Jonah Kerry doing a little dance behind me, yeah.
Wearing like a 80s jogging suit. All right, well, I'm very excited to have you doing baseball, and I think that's your calling. I know down the road you're going to do some boxing. You can't talk about it yet, but those are your two lanes. You've done a nice job of staying in them, and always like to hear whatever you have to say about baseball and boxing. Sorry, I told you 35 minutes. I think we went like 55. My apologies.
That's all right. I'm doing the late night show, so I'm good. I'm not on until 1 a.m. tonight, so I'm good.
All right, beautiful. Come on during the playoffs.
I'll do that. Absolutely, Bill.
All right, good luck in the new digs.
Thank you, man. Take care.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.